Good morning, Ben.
G'day, Sally. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Excited to be here and doing Chapter 4 in Australia's Innovation Conversation.
It's amazing. We've got to chapter 4. That's an
I know. Your headline here is from Bill Ferris. As a nation, we're good at creating knowledge, but simply not good enough at transferring or applying it.
Yeah, well, we're a good example of that, aren't we?
Sometimes.
We're just practicing. But anyway, we're here and we're on.
Exactly. So today's topics, we're really going to be covering off innovation, work systems, product, our business models, the reports on innovation in Australia that we have, and that covers off some detail around Professor Roy Green's report. And we're also going to be talking about some of Bill Ferris's insights that you'll contextualise for us, Ben, in relation to your experience here in Australia.
Happy.
Yeah. So I think it'd be good to have a chat to start with, Ben, if you could share with us the ways of thinking about innovation.
Look, there's all sorts of ways of thinking about it, but a really simple way is to think about, most of us think about it in terms of, the Apple iPhone. So that's been one of the outstanding examples of innovation in recent years. Certainly probably in our lifetime in terms of how it's changed the world. But not every innovation is a stunning product. Mind you, it would be good if it was. But a product innovation is an obvious one to think about. But more recently in times, we've seen what you might call business model innovation. So we've seen a whole range of new business models evolve because of the technology. So things like Airbnb, Uber, and now we have a whole range of, if you like, Air Wallets, Afterpay, systems like that are profoundly different and are challenging a lot of different models. So you've got new products, and then you've got new business models. But if you work back in the chain, so from the outside in, and they're kind of on the front end with the customer, those two, there's the possibility of major innovation in the systems that we use to do business, and Australia's a really good example about our inability to address some of those systems. And one of the things we're not good at in Australia, and we haven't been particularly innovative at it, is the whole issue of, if you like, collaboration between universities and business in the pursuit of innovation. And if you come even a step further back, and more recently, the government has had a struggle in the whole area of industrial relations, and, they're all kind of processes where you don't necessarily think about innovation, but wouldn't it be good if, for example, we could be more innovative in our industrial relations systems? We're locked in a time warp in some areas because people just don't want to change. So, we've got, if you look along the chain, you've got, if you like, a range of inputs, and you can have innovations in terms of input. You can have a lot of processes, and you can have innovation in terms of processes. You have kind of products, and then you have market entry points. They're all the ways you can kind of conceptualise innovation, and that's just one model. But it's worth thinking about it in those terms, certainly in Australia, because we're not bad at inventing things, but as you said, and you referred to the quote, we're not good at actually making it happen in the marketplace. And I think more recently, CSIRO produced a document that said we're a nation of adopters. We're more good at, we're better at copying things than we are at actually inventing and commercialising things.
Yes, yeah. And I see that play out in all industries. And it really does relate back to the whole looking overseas for answers to America, the UK, China, places like that, to actually then go, oh, they've done it, now we'll adopt it. However, quite often ideas were started here in Australia, yet it went back overseas and then came back to us. So this seems to be a recurring story.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole, if we go right back in our history, I mean, the Wi-Fi was a really good example, which went on to become internet. Wi-Fi was invented in Australia, but we were not able to commercialise it in any significant way. It's an interesting conundrum that we face. And, when Turnbull introduced the innovation debate, I had some hopes that it would become a major issue. But, it's not something that Australians, if you like, really buy into. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that, I was reading a document the other day prepared by an incubator, if you like, a business incubator, and of the 12 projects that they've undertaken in the last 4 or 5 years that they've got funding for, most of them have been commercialised offshore. They haven't been commercialised in Australia, and that's a huge issue for this country going forward, I think, in terms of our...
And has that been after they've put in a fair amount of due diligence to try and raise the capital or the support or funding here in Australia, or is it just that they looked straight to overseas because it was a better scalable model? Or
look, I think they would say that they'd tried hard in Australia and the capital wasn't there. I mean, I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think it's interesting that it continues to happen, and there's a general suggestion that that's what does happen. I don't think we measure the right things. When you're looking at some of the things we measure in our innovation system, we're preoccupied with measuring the inputs. The one serious measure that we could introduce is, number of for-profit businesses created by R&D, Australian R&D investment. Maybe that would be, if we measured that sort of thing, we'd get a different result. But we're more excited about measuring the number of deals we've done. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, in the sense we get the licensing fees and a whole range of benefits. But, more recently in the language, there's a concept emerging called retained economic value or retained economic benefit. How do we retain more value from our R&D investment in Australia? That's, I think, a question that we have to grapple with.
Yeah, it's a big question, and again across all industries, I think.
Oh, I think absolutely certainly across all industries. Yeah.
Yeah. So, where do we start with that? What are some of who are some of the people like Professor Roy Green, that's already shedding some light, as well as yourself and many other people that are contributing to this conversation? What have we already found out, Ben?
Well, I mean, if you look at some of the research that's being done, there is a view that other people innovate a lot better than we do, and I mean, it's kind of in our psyche. Maybe our history actually is a limiting factor on us. There are cultural issues here that we kind of allow to predominate. There is an argument that the venture capital market here is not strong enough, and maybe we could do something about it. In that case, maybe the government's got to take a more proactive, if you like, market shaping position rather than a market reacting position. And business at some level is happy to sit back and let the government kind of support it, but it doesn't want the government to interfere. It's really interesting. A lot of our companies in Australia are not globally focused. there's a few of the bigger ones, but generically people, when they build a business in Australia, they don't set out to build a global business. If they can get 10% of the Australian market, that's a pretty good deal. There's a bit of a lifestyle factor in how people think about things.
So interesting. And also that has been a very beneficial way to go because of the 29 years of economic growth and the fact that our population is constantly increasing. That yields a good result, basically, to look at our market. And actually, if you, like you said, get 10% of the market here, well, then you'll have year-on-year growth, and you'll almost get into double-digit growth by default.
Well, the interesting thing is that's going to change, because COVID in effect has stopped immigration. And I think I read just in the last week, for the first year in a long time, our population is going to be in negative growth. And without immigration, we don't have growth. Our fertility rate in Australia is less than 2. And my understanding is if we want to maintain our population, our fertility has to be at about 2.1. And my understanding is it's below 2. And what's been allowing our population to grow has been immigration.
Yes, exactly. However, I don't think that the young ladies of Australia are looking to have more than 2 children at all. Certainly not how I read it, as far as social media and the people that I interact with.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's the same in the Western world everywhere. Australia, it's not Australia's problem. I mean, Europe is somewhere below 1.5. A lot of countries in Europe. But the challenge then is for Australia, the only way we're going to have economic growth under the circumstances that we know is by having bigger portions of immigration, bigger numbers of immigration. And the COVID has stopped that. And my understanding is that's going to have a bubble in the system for a fair while. So, there are those sorts of things. There's a whole range of, so we're not global. We don't think globally. And our capacity to collaborate, we have a very small manufacturing industry, and as a result of COVID now, the government's going to try and change that. But it makes innovation very hard, and it makes the commercialisation of innovation harder. So until we actually address some of the cultural issues, I mean, we're going to be in trouble in terms of our long-term prosperity, in my view.
And really, I think the answer to that is to bring people together and bring industry together. And you can see that there are groups that are doing that. The Australian Manufacturers Forum, for example, and that are doing it well. However, the participation rate is still not where it needs to be, because some of the platforms where people can actually easily contribute to ideas and at speed and relevance, like LinkedIn, for example, our manufacturing industry leaders aren't participating there. They're not actually involved in those forums. Not all of them, that's for sure.
Well, it comes back to a whole range of things, in that there is no coherent, clear view about what it is we're trying to do. In the end, if people thought they were working for something bigger, maybe there'd be an investment in coming together. But,
yes,
a lot of the indicators tell us that we're not very good at some of these things. But there is no kind of, and what I call them is moonshots, but great aspirations, And Bill Ferris, I mean, in his review of innovation in 2017, he named a couple of what he called national missions that would be part of an ongoing innovation process, and one of them was for Australia to be the healthiest nation in the world. Now, I guess when he was writing that, if you think about it, he was probably thinking about the scientific contribution to the world health, and that Australia's scientific contribution to its own health would be, we'd increase our longevity and our health system would be better. I'll bet he wasn't thinking of Australia being the healthiest country in the world as a result of being an island. COVID has put a whole different context around the statement Australia is the healthiest country in the world. Now we've handled the COVID, we've managed the COVID pandemic as well as any country in the world, and on that basis, we're one of the healthiest countries in the world. It had nothing to do specifically with scientific research done in Australia. So that's a whole dimension that I think we hadn't considered, but it's because we're part of a globe and we're an island. So it just may be that the fact that we're an island gives us an extraordinary competitive advantage in terms of attracting people to come and live here in the world in an era of pandemics. I think
most certainly.
I think it's a very interesting kind of different framework to think about it through.
Yeah, because it hasn't been considered like that before. It hasn't. There's been no necessity to really leverage the whole island situation.
Yeah.
If anything, that was seen as a bit of a disadvantage because of logistically how difficult it is for supply chain for Australia. That's been a shortcoming. However, now it's a benefit.
Well, potentially it's a huge benefit going forward, and our question is, how do we leverage that? It's and I mean, it's something that it's easy to leverage if we think hard enough. We've often talked about Australia as being clean and green, so our food industry's had a small upside to it because of that. But now the fact that we're relatively free of COVID makes us I would have thought makes us a very attractive proposition over time. If pandemics are going to be a feature of our ongoing life, that Australia is an attractive place to live for a whole lot of people. So how do we manage that to our advantage, without it being a burden, if you like?
Well, it'll be interesting to see who gets seats on the plane too, as far as, Victoria, for example, have reopened up international travel and starting to increase the numbers. And there's some discussion around, who gets to come to Australia? Is it holiday makers or people that are coming to stay and live?
Well, it'll be only
or return expats coming back.
Well, that'll only happen if we change our immigration policy or reopen our immigration policy, because as I understand it now, it's relatively closed for very good reasons. But, it may be that the choice, our economic growth over 25 years has in fact been masked, certainly in recent years, not by immigration, by our increasing population. It's not as if it's not as if we're doing more research and creating more wealth that way, and it's not as if we're more productive. So, we've kind of allowed ourselves to be lulled into a form of complacency, I think, that may well come and bite us on the arse if we don't actually think hard about it and do something about it. And there's no evidence that politicians want to make any hard decisions. So somewhere in their business has to provide leadership at least on the possibilities.
I think absolutely, because the politicians are puppeteered by too many different angles. And as you said, they're not actually guided towards a common goal. And the fact that we have this recurring roundabout of people coming in and out of politics or exiting the scene within 12 months or 24 months, it just it doesn't give us a long-term view at all.
Look, I think we have, there are some structural problems in our system. I mean, the election cycle is one. The fact that we're a federation is another one. Everyone's equal and no one can make a decision. What Morrison did during the COVID by bringing together the National Cabinet, was an early sign of, I think, something possibly that could actually be used to make Australia a much more prosperous nation. But we've just got to kind of get through that party political nonsense that actually stops us back. It takes us backwards, and I think Paul Kelly said it on last weekend's Australia, and it was a great little quote that said Parliament, in terms of some industrial relations legislation, looked into the future and retreated to nostalgia. And I thought that really kind of gets a whole lot of things about the Australian economic system, really. We're just not collectively pushing at the edge. We're pretty happy to let things happen, and I just think we can do better, and our inability to be genuine innovators in the world. The CSIRO document said something like only 9% of companies in Australia actually introduce an innovative product to the market in a certain window of time. Now, 9% is not a lot.
Yeah.
The fact is maybe we could do better. And we've kind of settled for a mindset, and I've said somewhere in the book about, the pursuit of mediocrity with passion. With that concept of being a nation of adopters, we're really kind of settling for a position of being the best at being second best. And in the end, if that's what we choose to be, let's absolutely be the best country in the world at adopting new technology. Let's not be second best. Let's be the absolute best. And let's not worry about innovation. Let's just be really good. But that means we have to develop a culture of fast learning.
Yes.
There's not a lot of evidence we're good at that. That the accelerated learning could well be our national skill if we choose to be a nation of adopters.
Yes. But interestingly, Ben, if I look to like an area that I know well, the built environment,
yep.
And if you consider the Australian Building Code, the adoption rate there, again, there's a lot of Australian standards, and then there's a lot of standards that are globalised, that are coming from American standards and British standards, for example, and then we adopt them here to suit our environment and make adjustments.
Yep.
And then we allow 2 years for those adjustments for the new code to be uptaken by the market.
Yep.
And then every single time, it's always in the last 6 months that everyone rushes to the finish line to try and get their products or certified to Australian standard at the last minute. It doesn't happen, and then the following 12 to 18 months to 2 years follows, where everyone else in the market, following the leaders, that is, then try and get their products because they're missing out on winning jobs and tenders, then they try and bring their products up to market. But what's really, really interesting is that backing up all of this is that there's not enough NATA accredited labs in Australia to actually, even if everyone decided to change a product or service and uphold the Australian standard within the first 6 months of the initial 2 year period and be really quick early learning adopters, there's not enough labs in Australia to even service that demand.
Is that right?
So there's the manufacturing gap. Yeah, we don't have the essential technology to do it.
So
it doesn't mean we can't go global and access the resources internationally. That can absolutely happen. However, as a country, we don't have enough.
So if you want to introduce something in the building industry, and it's revolutionary and it's developed offshore, it still has to go through our regulatory process here, and we don't have enough regulatory process to handle all that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we have the process and we have the accreditation labs to do it here.
Yeah.
So if you're bringing in one product or one product range, yes. But when there's a change to the entire industry,
all right,
and all the existing market needs to improve their products to a new standard, there's 2 years given to accomplish that, yet the market usually doesn't change in that first 2 years. So the learning, we're referencing the concept of early adoption and learning. The history here is showing that, no, they're not learning, which is why we have the issues that we do have in the built environment. And I find it myself quite interesting to see the overlay of how that represents what happens across industrial relations, across the pharmaceutical industry, across agriculture, and here we have the built environment, the same scenario is happening.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It's really interesting.
Well, it's that whole, if we're good at being adopters, and I mean, in the end, there's nothing wrong with that. We ought to make ourselves world class at it. So when there is major technological breakthroughs somewhere in the world, we ought to be on it, adopt it, and make it work in this country. The fact is, though, that's going to make life easier for us, but it may or may not make us wealthier as a nation or prosperous. And part of our challenge in this country, as I'm understanding it, is over time we've made the shift from being a mining or an agricultural-driven economy to being a service economy. And we've got some seriously good professional services technologies, and they're being used overseas. But our actual industry base in this country is very simplistic, and we need, our levels of, part of the reason our commercialisation process in this country doesn't work of intellectual property is we don't have a manufacturing base. We've got 6% of our GDP is manufacturing, and this is we're very dependent on China and other countries for some of our raw materials in the chemicals and pharmaceutical industry. There's a whole range of areas where, in the pursuit of lower cost, we've outsourced things to other countries. So we don't have what you call a complex economy. We have a relatively simple economy. And for prosperity to be a major benchmark in our future, it might be helpful if we had a more complex economy. And part of that is innovation, and part of that is the commercialisation of innovation. And there are a whole range of industries we can look at, and the government is looking at them, there's no question about it. But have we got the discipline to follow through, I guess, is the question, because it took us 30 years to dismantle the manufacturing industry, or even longer, over a long period of time, and it's dropped to 6%. If we want to get that back to 15 or 20% of our economy, which would give us a more robust economic base, that's it doesn't matter how you frame it, that's a 20 to 30 year project. And we don't have a lot of evidence in this country the government can concentrate, any government, either party, can concentrate for any longer than 20 to 30 days. It's a little terrifying. There's been some great work. There was a whole series of innovation reports done, started under the Rudd government, I think it was, and they produced some wonderful documentation on a whole range of topics that's what started me writing the book. Here's this great documentation, but nobody's read it. So they went right back from looking at innovation indicators to innovation and productivity. They talked about Australia in the context of the Asian century, and it went on. They did wonderful work, and they've kind of stopped doing it now. But you cannot do this stuff. You cannot build a coherent narrative about the future without good, solid, evidence-based thinking. And you just don't get any confidence that that's happening. Occasionally we produce great reports, but then nothing happens with them. So that point that you made about industry people talking to each other is just so pivotal.
It is. It absolutely is pivotal.
And yet, Australians generally are so dismissive of things like talk fests and conferences and events where people come together. But it's in those processes that you start to build a shared view of the future, and until you can build that, it's going to be very hard to move this country forward. We have to be able to find a way to build a shared future. And
yes.
There are two things we can do, and I've talked about it in the book. One is we can start to produce a whole set of papers on what does Australia look like in the context of prosperity in 20 to 30 years' time. Part of that might be establishing some moonshots and just creating you don't have to get the moonshots right. You just have to get them out there enough so that people want to fight with them. And in that kind of conversation about whether they're the best moonshots or not, that you get movement. So,
people should start by reading the book, Ben.
Because it's far be it from us.
I'm walking around with a copy of it everywhere I go. I'm like, here you go. You need to read this, and telling people about it, because I was at a meeting with 30 other HR professionals. It was a networking group,
yep.
And it was only the second time that I've been there. But in one of the breakout discussions, one of the ladies who works for a global pharmaceutical company was talking about how they're doing their enterprise bargaining negotiations at the moment, and the union are holding up and really, really holding the workforce to basically not accommodate what the company is looking for in regards to changes to their EBA to allow shift changes and more production without all these expected increases in. So they're blocking the flexibility, and they're asking for remuneration that's well beyond the market, the global market for this, let alone the Australian market. And they're already, one of the highest paid plants within their global footprint. So they're already behind the 8 ball. They're knocking back opportunities to produce and manufacture more products here in Australia from their global parent company constantly, because they can't actually meet the demand. So there's an opportunity for manufacturing to produce more. There's a market need, and the only blocking challenge is this flexibility and cost. They're not looking to reduce anyone's wages. They're looking to change the EBA to negotiate that, and they can't get anywhere. And I said to the lady, there are hundreds of case examples within Australia that you can refer to start educating your workforce as to what is going to happen if they continue down this road. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, have a look at General Mills, Holden, for example, just two quick ones. Have a look at case studies to actually demonstrate to your workforce, if they keep choosing to do this, eventually someone else will produce this product. Eventually there'll be more competitors in the market, and it will become not sustainable and not viable for this plant to be operational. And therefore everyone's, 600 jobs will be lost. So you can either start the negotiation now and work towards a more sustainable future which benefits everyone, or you can look at the viewpoint for this year and this next 2 years EBA negotiation and not look for the next 10 to 15 years. I said to her, but it might take you 2 years to really educate your workforce, but That's the work that needs to be done, not having conversations with the union and tilly-tattling on these minor details. You need to really look at the big global picture and, the role that you have. She was dumbfounded with that conversation. It really shifted her eye beyond the grass in front of her to the horizon of what it really looks like. And they're the conversations that more people need to have, I believe.
Well, this is, look, back in the 1990s when economic reform was a big issue, and a couple of the big agenda items were Australia being globally competitive and that we should benchmark against other countries in the world. Now, first thing, globally competitive, well, that just dropped off the agenda because we couldn't be. The business just, at the simplest level, drove a low-cost agenda, and, our manufacturing industry, if you have a look at that paper I wrote on It's the Culture Stupid, highlights the fact that even post all of that economic restructuring, our manufacturing industry still continued downwards, and it's exactly that issue. We just couldn't be competitive in terms of costs. Now, maybe we don't compete in those industries, and the people you're talking to, those industries are going to go out of fashion. What we've got to find and position ourselves is in a different form of high value adding manufacture. Now, whatever that means, that's the challenge. And so businesses now, if they continue down the path they're on, there won't be any work. You're right. There's the whole American Midwest manufacturing system, but look at our own manufacturing system. It's all gone offshore. We don't make anything in Australia anymore, and that's part of our dilemma.
Yeah, and even where we do, like the rail, for example, and then we're importing trains and elements for trains and tracks that don't even fit our systems here. And why are we importing them when we can actually make them here? Why are we doing that? I'm confused by that.
Well,
I don't know industries deeply, but you read snippets and you think, yeah, why is this happening? Why do we keep doing this?
Look, in the end, you've got to believe everyone out there is doing the best they can, within their limited frameworks. And it's up to the leadership of our system to create bigger frameworks to allow people to see possibilities. No one ever resolves conflict by focusing specifically on the problem. Sometimes you need to kind of set back and look at a whole broader range of issues to see where that conflict fits in and then how you can manage it in a different way. So, it's a whole subject for another conversation. And I can remember very early in my consulting life someone saying to me once, about what motivated people to change. And this old guy just said to me once, he said, forget about all this other modern stuff. He said, it's just fear and greed. That's what will motivate them. And I'm a little bit, although fear has been a really interesting thing in terms of COVID, what motivated us to change to manage the COVID experience? Fear.
Yeah.
I think aspiration can motivate people to change. And if this country had a serious aspiration or a set of aspirations about what it was going to do and how we could do different things, that might be a motivator. And I mean, that's the kind of basis of, I wrote the book, saying if we could actually come together and agree on a whole range of moonshots by industry, and it's kind of happening in an oblique way, but that's the subject of another conversation. I think we're there.
Thanks, Ben. I'll look forward to our next chapter, where we're going to be looking at Australia's challenges in a rapidly globalising world.
All right.
Thanks for your time today.
Cheers.
Bye.